Boom! According to that, I am live. Welcome. This is Tokyo Tonight. My name is Hiko Simon. It is 10:32 p.m. Yeah, it's always roughly 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time every week. Welcome once again. I see there's already people here in the chat. I know I just set this up a couple of minutes ago, but it's great to see you all. As always, I'll let people rock in. We'll do a bit of banter, bit of hello to everybody. Great to see Ben Duncan. Good to see you, man. Welcome into the chat. We've got Believe in Yourself. Quint Rankid, are we experiencing technical features? We're always experiencing technical features. That's my whole life, basically, is like a technical feature. Ada Void, good morning. Good to have you with us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you are here in Japan. Mr. Cordy Chad made it just in time, I'm sure. Good evening for you. Good to have everyone in here. It's been an interesting week, I suppose. I mean, it's just pretty much, I'm sure it's the same everywhere like it is here in Japan. It's just non-stop Ukraine conflict stuff, which is, I mean, yes, it's mesmerizing as conflict stuff is. I guiltily admit I'm actually, is it wrong to admit I'm kind of glad that there's another news story other than just COVID all the time, like we've had for 2.5 years? I mean, you know, obviously, I think it's objectively, it would be better to just be continuing to have the pandemic be the news than have this horrible thing happening. But at the same time, it's gotten your attention back on the news again anyways. Even here in Japan, most of the news is like 90% this. There's very little domestic news going on. I've got most of the stories on that here tonight. I've been very conscious about, I'm definitely not qualified to talk about the nuances of, the Ukraine conflict. I follow the news closely, and I have an interest in it, but I don't pretend to be qualified or any kind of commentator at all on it. So, I try to stick to what I talk about, to being at least the Japan elements of it, the ways in which Japan's been reacting to it, and what's been going on here, and indeed what the risk is. I was asked yesterday. I tweeted, I think, that, my mum heard that in Australia people are starting to freak out about the risk of cyber attacks from the Russians. And she said, are they worried about cyber attacks there? And yes, I did actually say the joke that, we have this bank called Mizuho, and it like has all of these sudden IT outages all the time. And seriously, I don't think anyone would be able to tell if it was cyber attacked. We will get into, of course, the Toyota attack tonight, and it's not clear if that has anything to do with Russia. It's probably bad timing, but of course it's a possibility. I mean, for what we're seeing. Even just tonight, I mean, I keep watching all of these other videos I mean, I can't help but have my brain go round on it a little bit. I'll try my best, and as you know, most likely fail on giving hot takes and whatnot. We've got more people in the chat. Sean Bro, long time no see, Sean Bro. Great to have you back in the chat. Hope you're doing well. Love that farmers are stealing tanks. Well, yeah. I mean, I actually just shared a tweet just before this. If you follow me on Twitter, the Ukrainian ambassador to Japan has a photo that he's forwarding where apparently a bunch of Russian soldiers that were taking over an office building, apparently the engineer in the building, saw on the security camera that the elevator was full of Russian soldiers coming up, and he just shut off the power to the elevator and locked the locked the Russian soldiers in the elevator, and used the security camera to take a photo of this sort of elevator crammed with trapped Russian soldiers. And there's which is a lighter moment, but of course, at the same time, that in the end of the day, if they're not going to be able to, if their troops are not going to be able to do a blitzkrieg, which it looks like they're not, they're just going to do what they did in every other major conflict in Afghanistan and Grozny and everywhere else. They're just going to like bomb and missile the place into dust, unfortunately, which is pretty bleak. And I definitely think it's the right thing for those who are leaving to leave. I mean, I admire the people there. I admire that the including the president, that they are putting up resistance to it, as they should. I wish that there was more that other countries could do to stop, but it's remarkable again to see the in a horrible. It's better that the world not be coming together and not have this to bring it together than having it. But there again, I mean, the fact is, it's given the world something to rally around. And it is fascinating to see how all this is playing out. But But at the same time, I mean, and how many times has this happened that from, particularly from Eastern Europe? I mean, it's happened in many parts of the world, of course, but yeah, we have a whole, millions of people walking across Europe again, seeking refuge in other countries. And again, other countries are welcoming refugees. A lot of commentary, of course, that they're being treated differently to refugees from outside of Europe. But, obviously complicated. Europe, Ukraine, Russia, they're full of good people and bad people. And, it's just sitting here in Japan, of course. What can you really sort of do? But I can't stop watching it myself, of course. Anyway, we've also got, Aaron, great to see you in here. Aaron, boom indeed. We've got, thank you always for your moderation skills. I heard that the Ukrainian mechanic of a Russian billionaire's yacht tried to sink a ship and was caught and arrested. I did hear about that. Brianna W., great to have you in here. Good for him indeed. The superintendent, and all of that. Indeed, Quint Rankin, that's exactly my take as well. I mean, all of this. And, Trump had a point. I'll admit Trump had a point that, frankly, European powers were losing interest in NATO. They weren't making the payments. They weren't making the spend commitments that NATO countries had had. And NATO kind of looked like it was just sort of becoming irrelevant. And, basically, this is Putin's done he's affirmed the point that Trump was correctly making. I mean, he wasn't, although I think the guy was a douchebag, it doesn't mean he's wrong about everything. And actually, he's proven him right. And that is a thing. So indeed, for US president, okay, I hear that he's polling like 120% support on Facebook. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about. I might just try to get out my stuff about this in the pre-show stuff. If you're in the chat, by the way, do say hello. It's always lovely to say hello to people who are in here watching. Also, remember, if you like, I pretty much only do this for the likes, so I do appreciate the likes. Of course, you can sit and watch it to the end and decide, of course, but I do appreciate if you do that. If you like. If you want to get my attention and ask me a question or, just make a statement that you would like me to respond to or see, do what Brianna W. did. Say my name, Hiko Simon. You don't even have to do the @ mark anymore. Just spell it correctly, and it will flash orange, and I will pay attention to that. Trump was correct. Try campaigning on that. I think Facebook and other social media have been banned in Russia and Florida as well, I think. I think everyone can only watch Truth now. But yes, indeed. EDIR, good to see you. Chris Russian, good to see you. Very much, by the way, like China, of course. China has all of these political trolls that go out on Twitter, even though Chinese, of course, within country can't access Twitter, at least with not a VPN, which you can get in trouble for. And now Russia seems to be like with these censorship laws on, laws that they're going to arrest anybody who says anything the Russian government deems not true by their standards. I mean, they're running headlong into becoming like a North Korea by the looks of it, which, combined with the external sanctions and the internal repression of information, is just crazy. So yes, squirrels and peanuts indeed always appreciated. Milchman too, great to see you there. Thanks everybody who's saying hello. I do appreciate that. We'll see. I don't have a lot of topics, but we'll see how far I go through it all. I guess I might just jump into it there. In terms of the COVID situation, I'll just quickly share a status that it's the 7-day moving average, which is the best way because you have holidays and weekends and stuff like that. That makes it go up and down through the week. But the situation is basically it still is an average of just over 10,000 cases per day in Tokyo. And it's going, it's shifting at a 98% rate at the moment, i.e. it was like going down steadily. It was like 80%. So it was like dropping like 20% week over week before. It's almost gone flat now. So, and at 10,000, it seems to be plateauing. So definitely, I think consistent with other countries, it's not going down very much. There's something today as well that said that 20% of cases are kids under 10, and I'm definitely seeing that at my son's school. Every day we're getting emails that there was a class where some kid had it, and usually multiple classes lately. So, it's, again, perhaps not as many serious cases, and the hospitalization rate is dropping. So it doesn't seem to be slowing down the momentum, of course, for reopening Japan. And great to see, of course, that students can come in and business visa holders can now start to travel. A huge waiting list for that is going to take a long time to clear. No idea when there's going to be tourism again. If you want to find out when there'll be tourism again, check out Ninja Monkey. He did a video recently that I haven't had a chance to watch, but he talked specifically with predictions about when the country's going to reopen for tourism. But yeah, a lot of people I know have been waiting to come into the country for student or for study purposes for a long time, and great to see them coming back in. So, you know, a situation is, I think, here, as with everywhere else. In Tokyo, I'm talking specifically 10,000 cases per day. That still is crazy high. I mean, compared to all the other waves, that's like way higher than we've ever had before. But I think this is the same in other places as well, that not so many serious cases and still scary and still don't want to get it, but it seems relatively okay. Yeah, believe in yourself. Ask, what's my opinion of hex if I have one? I don't know what hex is. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. Maybe you can explain it to me in the comments, and now I will give you my opinion. But the fact I don't know what it is probably might be an opinion in itself there. Believe in yourself. So feel free to explain. Buenos dias, Shumas. Great to have you here. How are the dogs voting? I guess I've got to read what you said before that to understand. Quinn Rankin, I'll repeat my earlier comment. Hiko Simon, I watched a Russian couple food shopping on YT. And they said that the best quality butter was from New Zealand. See, not all Russian people are bad. There you go. I mean, discerning taste. You have to respect that. You have to respect that they know where the good butter's from. But yeah, you know, New Zealand actually does okay for cheese, although I never convinced my French friends of that when I showed them some. Strong cheddar, pretty much. Yeah, cheddar. You can never impress Europeans with cheddar. It's a genetic defect from being from the UK. But yes, how are the dogs voting? I have no idea. Dogs are voting for whoever gives them a treat. Well, dogs are pretty much just looking to please. So yes, indeed. Oh, I see, including house cat. I get it now. I see the banter. Yes, indeed. Dogs are. Who knows? Who knows? So look, I'm going to jump into the topics. That's 15 minutes of intros again. Anyone swordfish? Hi, do I know if any Japanese companies are condemning or boycotting Russian companies? Generally speaking, most Japanese companies are falling into line with the Japanese calls for sanctions. And, you know, like, for example, the car manufacturing companies like Mazda have closed down their plants. I think it was Mazda and Mitsubishi have closed down their car plants in Russia. Well, certainly in Ukraine, actually, come think of it, I don't know about Russia. I know that specifically Japan Tobacco is getting called out. In fact, this is kind of a good topic. I feel like I should do this in the kickoff. But yeah, there is the Japan Tobacco has said that they will remain neutral on all of this and continue selling the Russian cigarettes, which to me sounds like a hostile act, but, you know, that's their business. But of course, Japan is taking some of the strongest sanction measures of G7 nations. They're supporting the sanctioning of targeted Russian banks, including a central bank and SWIFT and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, Japanese companies, I think, are generally following that. The thing is, Japanese companies are not very exposed to Russia because of the whole territory dispute situation, which I'll be talking about today. So yeah, I'll get into that in a minute. And good to have you there in the chat, anyone swordfish. And thanks for marking me. So definitely everybody do that if you want to get my attention. Remember to like if you like, and let's kick off. Also, by the way, every week, just a little bit, it's nice to see that the audio version of the recording of this is growing for people who catch up. Do make sure, I'll mention at the end as well, but they're on Anchor FM/Hiko Simon, just like my YouTube. Yeah, you can download an audio version of this after it, where I cut out all of this banter and I'll go straight from the intro to what I'm about to do, which is starting the actual topic. So yeah, Paragoti, hey, good to see you. EDR, oh no, tobacco company having a lack of morals. Well, I mean, you know, in a way, if they're selling to the aggressor nation, it probably actually maybe this is a good use of tobacco. Maybe they should be lowering their prices. Who knows? So yes, I am going to jump in. So. Tonight on Tokyo Tonight, in terms of topics, we don't have, there hasn't been a lot of domestic and non-Ukraine related news. Even some of the news I have is Japan related aspects of the Ukraine conflict. But yeah, just for an idea of what's been going on this week, let's jump into the topics. And the first topic is that a mysterious cyber attack hit Toyota the other day. and for, or at least it hit, I believe, a supplier of Toyota, but it hit systems of the supplier that basically caused Toyota to need to stop all of its operations, even in the main company, for a day. It was one interesting that apparently it was a ransomware attack, and it was they were back online after a day. I also read accounts explaining that Toyota was able to recover quickly, in part because they keep paper copies of all of their sales orders and whatnot. They had systems that were able to recover, although it took a full day to recover. I hope that was the case and that they didn't actually pay the ransom. But of course, the internet reaction was the inevitable. Of course, what everybody thought. But yes, the various comments, particularly number 23 there. If you want to scream, "Oh my God, that's terrifying," the Japanese expression for "Oh my God, that's terrifying" is "Osorosha." At least if you're from Osaka, that's how you would say. You'd say "ya" on the end, which of course sounds like in Japanese, Russia is pronounced Roshia, and if you put "also Russia," it sounds like an Osakan person screaming, "That's terrifying," and that's what people are screaming in the chat. Not that they're pointing any fingers, of course. I was asked myself, actually, the other day, is Japan afraid of cyber attacks? I mean, it always is. Not clear at all that this is a retaliation for the Japanese government's announcement of pretty strong support for the sanctions that are being imposed on Russia, including all of the banking, energy purchases, and so on. There's been some debate. There's another article I've got saved in here about whether Japan really should be cutting itself off from Russian energy. But yeah, Japan's pretty strongly joined in with the sanctions, which themselves are pretty unprecedentedly strong. Again, I've heard descriptions that the sanctions are basically the same level of sanctions, like including like central bank sanctions and so on, and excluding them from the global financial system. That's like Cuba, North Korea, Iran level sanctions, and yeah, Japan participating in that is pretty significant. That said, for again, a reason I'll show with another topic later on in the show as well. Japan's not that exposed to Russia, but well, actually mainly because of the territorial dispute, which I always thought was a bit silly, given all the energy and all the the potential for Japan to strike out and become more, at least less dependent on the United States through increasing its ties with Russia. And it's something that's been discussed strategically for a long time. In fact, former Prime Minister Hatoyama is known as a bit of a Russophile, and he's always been an advocate of that as well, about breaking away from America a little bit and strengthening ties with countries like Russia. However, yeah, in terms of Toyota, in the end of the day, the first joke is, I mean, again, not clear if this actually was Russia or had anything to do if it was just bad timing, but it looks like they used the old Adama strategy, the Battlestar Galactica, the at least in the remade Battlestar Galactica series. Of course, the reason that the Battlestar Galactica was the only starship that survived the first Cylon attack was because the Captain Adama, insisted that all of the phone systems and all of the computer systems on the ship be analog. And it looks like Toyota, yeah, indeed, keeping paper copies and faxes of all of the orders may have saved them from a cyber attack from Russia. Again, I'm not exactly sure that that's fully an accurate reflection. In fact, what I really hope is that their IT systems were so good that they were able to actually rebuild even in a ransomware attack from a backup. I would hope that's the case, but I'd say it's about a 50% chance that they were actually using, that they were saved by using faxes for everything. It's quite possible. Is there a chance that there could be more attacks? Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, at the moment, the stuff coming out of that country right now is just so sort of crazy. The fact that they're talking about nukes, the fact that they're talking about just this evening they said that Putin came out and said that we have to invade them because we think they're trying to develop nuclear weapons or dirty bombs or whatever. I mean, they're literally pulling out that we have to invade another country for WMDs, which, yeah, I mean. If he's saying it sarcastically, it's kind of actually a fair shot, but at the same time, I mean, just, stupid, right? So yeah, of course, I suppose if there is an upside to the fact that Japan is so in the dark ages, it is the fact that I suppose if you looked at nations of the world as starships, Japan kind of is the Galactica. It is kind of running off faxes and phone lines, and maybe that is some measure of protection. But yeah, I guess we'll have to see if things get any worse. Indeed, how protracted this whole thing becomes. So yes, into the comments, by the way. We've got more people joining. Good to see John Anderson. Indeed, greetings from London. Good to have you there, London. We've got Odie Jr. Boom, a little late. No problem at all. Razo Gul, good to have you in the chat as well. And Aaron has a question. Japan IT systems good? I'm surprised to hear you say that after all my previous thoughts. Toyota is an interesting case. There are companies, by the way, like Sony and a few other companies that have world-leading great IT, but of course the average is so low. And Toyota is, I think manufacturers generally are not great when it comes to IT. Toyota is really struggling. They're trying to catch up on making EVs. They're trying to catch up on self-driving cars. And I know that they're doing all kinds of things with, they are struggling, but they are trying really hard to catch up and be innovative. They're building a town in Shizuoka to be like a tech city of the future demo town, and they're trying to get IT companies to help them with that. So yeah, this is why I said with Toyota, it's 50-50. If this was like, if this was a more traditional sort of Japanese rural manufacturer, which Toyota has been for a long time, but if it was like that, I would say absolutely the faxes absolutely saved the day, that and the pagers. But with Toyota, it could actually be that they actually have good IT systems that are actually resilient to this, which I would assume would be the case with, for example, Mitsubishi UFJ Bank or, Sony or those sort of other companies that are actually quite good with this sort of thing. But Toyota's, as you'd expect, they're not leading the way on EVs, but they're actually, I'd always say don't count them out. They're catching up. But with this, I don't know how caught up they are. So it's an interesting example. For the next topic, actually, I mentioned just before how, within Japan, there is actually, like in every country, there is a kind of a strong Russia, pro-Russia lobby, or at least maybe not a strong one, but there are a few prominent politicians who, to varying degrees are either influenced or strategically pro-Russia, or, I don't think you can, given how little trade there is with Russia, it's kind of pointless being on their payroll per se. But there's two famous cases. There's one is a guy called Munio Suzuki, who is actually from, he is a politician, a former LDP politician. I think his daughter has taken over his seat, but from Nemuro. Nemuro is basically a town closest to the occupied Northeast Territories, otherwise known as the Southern Kuril Islands, which are occupied by Russians, actually people deported by Stalin, Ukrainian Germans deported by Stalin live on those islands, apparently. Now multi-generations have been there for like 70 years now. But the community that lived on those islands of Japanese people who were first interned in gulags in Siberia for decades and then allowed to return to Japan, the exile community from those islands lives in Nemuro, and that town, also a lot of Ainu culture and a lot of Ainu heritage people, of course, in that community. And the local politician there is Munio Suzuki, or he was for a long time. And he had this thing where he was always trying to play up good relations with Russia to allow people to go back and visit family graves and, their old homes and everything, and, keep up the cemeteries and everything over on those islands. And, in order to basically build up goodwill with the Russian communities on those occupied islands, he basically was able to divert a lot of Japanese money into, building like projects to improve those communities for the Russian inhabitants to build up sort of goodwill. And in fact, apparently it turned out that one of those, foreign goodwill projects was actually, he quietly persuaded the Russians to put his name on and call it Munio House. And when that got out that he was using basically Japanese government aid money, and it was already kind of sensitive, the fact that he was using Japanese government aid to, be friendly with Russia, when it turned out that he was putting his name all over the buildings, and it seemed like he was diverting the aid money to help himself with his re-election campaigns. He kind of, I think he ended up in jail, actually, for abuse of the funds. But he's still quite popular with as a big advocate for those communities. However, he's from the LDP. This guy's totally different. This is Yukio Hatoyama. He was the when the Democrats kicked out the LDP for the second time in like 75 years, and they briefly had a 2 to 3 year complete disaster of a term of 3 prime ministers. He was the first, and believe it or not, I don't think he was actually the worst. He was bad, but he wasn't the worst prime minister. He was when I still had a little bit of hope that they might be good. But he did have a eccentric background. There, people call him the space alien because he likes to talk about aliens and stuff like that. And he has a background of being, as a leftist in Japan and being fundamentally against sort of the right wing arm in arm with the American military and CIA for the last 70 years. He's always advocated a position of Japan having greater independence from America. And around that always suggested that having good relations with Russia would help Japan exercise a more independent foreign policy and sovereignty, which objectively would make sense if you didn't consider what Russia is and how they behave, and how you don't just simply do deals with Russia because it makes sense, as we are learning. But yeah, he was always, for example, he had to resign because, in large part, because of his advocacy that he promised the people of Okinawa that he was going to convince the Americans to just move their military bases away. And he learned a hard lesson from Hillary Clinton, that you don't election campaign based on American security interests, and in particular promising to get rid of them. So he's always been kind of pro-Russia, but and around that he just decided to randomly tweet that people have to remember this is all happening because of Ukrainian terrorists attacking separatists within Ukraine and whatever, and Russia had to go in and defend them. So basically, he took the not quite that they're all Nazis line, but he did take the idea that this is all because of Ukrainian aggression against the Luhansk and Donetsk republics, which again, I mean, that was just under a cold sort of a stalemate. It's the Russian sort of excuse that they had to rush in to defend those places, but he's voicing that view. And of course, again, the Japanese internet just saying that, this is the space alien again. And this guy just seems to love Putin. So again, just he was a great prime minister, except for whenever he talked. Whenever he actually said what he represented, a chance at a different sort of a government and a functioning democracy, that was great. But whenever he actually opened his mouth, and everyone would just become crushingly disappointed. That's why the Democrats lost, and why we're back with the LDP. It's because of stuff like that from the opposition. I mean, they just have to not be crap. That's all that they have to do, and and the whole world is theirs. But unfortunately, doesn't work out that way. Hey, we've got Sadiq Hakanguris in the chat from Florida, I believe. Great to have you in there. Other comments that we have, one from Aaron. So if Russians try to occupy the contested islands with military, which they already do, what would the Japanese response be? Well, they actually, apart from the fact that they didn't militarize them much lately, the last couple of years, they have been doing military exercises in and on those islands. So, the Russians are totally militarily occupying those islands. I think you mean the other way around, right? I mean, those contested islands are inhabited and militarily occupied by Russia, and they have been since World War II. And that's why Japan doesn't have a peace treaty with Russia. In fact, spoiler alert, let's jump ahead. I didn't organize the topics, but this nice lady from the Russian Foreign Ministry in Japan, everybody knows what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson looks like, because it's the same person who comes on all the time, and she's capable of being quite endearing and charming, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson lady. But at the same time, when she's supposed to condemn the hegemonic capitalist imperialists, she'll totally rip on that. Not used to seeing the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, but she's been saying some stuff, including about those islands, which I will come to in just a moment. Paragotti, wasn't Hatoyama's wife also a bit of an eccentric? Yes, she was. I believe that she actually thought that she could communicate with aliens or something like that. Which, I mean, nothing wrong. Again, everyone was kind of ready for a change and voted for that with eyes wide open. But he just did some really, really dumb stuff. And that said, for as crazy as Hatoyama was, and as much of an idiot as I think he is, I don't think he's as bad as Khan, who followed. Khan, I think, is actually up there with Taro Aso in terms of the worst prime ministers, up there with Yoshiro Mori, actually. Mori's the champion. Mori's the OG of terrible Japanese prime ministers, but Japan just seems to be able to manufacture, terrible politicians and leaders like they can good quality cars. I mean, they just seem to be able to consistently produce just top level schmucks, when it comes to political leaders, and unfortunately it's across the spectrum. So yes, indeed. I'll go into the next topic. Apparently, the Russian foreign minister, in reaction to the Japanese announcement of sanctions against Russia, said Japan can forget forever, can forget about ever getting those islands back. Um, Bear in mind that Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, periodically, Japan and Russia are still having talks about returning the islands. And Abe and Putin allegedly got along pretty well. Abe, I think, even gave him a Shibaken or an Akita dog or something. And Putin loves Japan. He said this to Abe apparently in a meeting. Everyone was a bit freaked out at the way that he said it. I mean, if Putin comes up and whispers in your ear that he loves you, I mean, seriously, do you run? I think that's the natural reaction. But yeah, he loves judo. He loves Japanese dogs. He keeps as a pet, and so he sort of wants to be friends. But he also, no matter how much he likes Japan, he's not going to give those islands back because he's all about nationalism and all that kind of stuff. And apparently the Russians don't mind dropping like as we've seen crazy rhetoric bombs, like Lavrov said that Japan should just accept that it lost the war and this is their fault for siding with the Nazis, and they're never going to get the islands back in the middle of negotiating about like energy deals and swapping the islands, and hey, about that Brezhnev deal from 1956, yeah, can we reboot that? And the Russians kind of play them along, but I don't know, maybe they suddenly freak out and start calling Japan Nazis in the middle of the negotiation sometimes. So like, this isn't the craziest thing that Russia's ever said. The fact that Japan persists. But here's the thing. Japan has played this well. Japan never gets credit for playing the sort of stuff well, but it's exactly like North Korea. Japan is showing up and talking, and there's a question as to whether Japan even sincerely thinks it has a chance of ever getting these islands back. But by showing up and going through the motions of talking, it has a get out of jail free pass on ever getting wrapped up on basically with Russia's BS. All of the gangster stuff, all of the oligarchs, all of the investment money that went into Russia. Japan totally got a free pass on it because, yeah, they said, yeah, but about those islands. So I must admit it is interesting now that Russia is talking about, Russia did actually last week, did have a helicopter fly into Hokkaido airspace from those islands. So not clear if that was a mistake or that was Russia just sort of hinting that, yeah, you guys had better remember that, theoretically, I always like to joke that the peace negotiations with Russia are not about return of the southern Kurils so much as Russia promising not to invade the rest of Hokkaido. But like I say, Russia seems to be willing to say crazy stuff sometimes. And yeah, this lady who actually the other week, I mean, so when the media asked about, when the Russians were building up their troops in Belarus and all around Ukraine, and they said, when are you planning to, clearly it looks like you're preparing to stage an invasion. And she sort of sarcastically asked the Western press, can you please tell me when we're going to be having this supposed invasion because I need to schedule my vacations? I mean, that's the joke that she made about the fact that Russia was about to and did eventually actually invade another country and massacre thousands of people. So she... that's a Russian joke that she wants to schedule her vacation. I mean, seriously, you look at the last 20 years, if she had to schedule her vacations around Russian invasions of their neighbors, she'd hardly ever be able to take vacation. I feel sorry for her in a way. Maybe that's why she's in such a bad mood about the islands. But yeah, she's said Japan can forget forever about the islands, so I guess that's that. But yeah, it's a bit like with the abductee thing with North Korea. It gives Japan an out. And I've always said Japan should be like, all the energy, all the oil and gas just like off the coast of Japan in Sakhalin and Kamchatka and in the Russian Far East. Good for Japan, good for Russia. Why wouldn't they be rushing toward this? But yeah, they just can't do that. So what can you do? Riggs Maxwell, good to see in the chat, and Black Tengu, good to have you here in the chat as well as PB. So yeah, it looks like they're staying in character, which you have to respect for the Russians. They're just like you have to wonder, was the foreign ministry trained by watching like Bond movies and trying to? You seen the Russian ambassador in the UN, and it's like, let's have a moment of silence for all the dead civilians in Ukraine, and he has to interrupt it. Yeah, it's like, anyway, it is totally nuts. And actually, I must admit, there's something I don't have a good segue here to talk to, but I have been thinking. I have a thought, a suggestion. There are Korean presidential elections this week, and there's always Japan always looks at the Korean presidential elections, and they don't really care, honestly. I mean, it's interesting. They have lots of dances, and of course, Korea has presidents, which Japan doesn't have. So the system over there has become quite different. And Japan always sort of looks, and frankly, they're only really interested in, is this president going to actually uh, are things going to get better or worse, or are they going to stay the same, or are they just going to leave us alone at last? It's pretty much how the Japanese media looks at the Korean election. So they look at the two candidates and they say who looks like they're going to be friendlier to Japan. Typically, the conservatives in Korea are friendlier towards Japan. But that is a weapon that is used against them, and just when they're getting too unpopular, then they have to flip around and be terrible to Japan. But it's good in Korea to be tough on Japan. And I must admit, while I've shared many times how Japan, I think, has expressed its remorse. I'm sure Japan. I don't think anyone in Japan today thinks it was a good idea. Like if you ask anyone, should they ever invade Korea ever again? Do they ever want to incorporate Korea into Japan ever again? I'm pretty sure the answer is 0%. Nobody in Japan wants Korea to be part of Japan ever again. They recognize that was a terrible mistake. Even people who feel, like glory to the empire and all that kind of thing, definitely nobody thinks that, it's worth the trouble. And I must admit, maybe this is a good model for the Ukrainians. In the end of the day, I mean, they might be powerless to deal with all of the carpet bombings and the artillery and everything happening, but at the same time, you can just imagine 100 years from now, the Russians saying, "Hey, that Putin guy was a real dick, and we're very, very sorry. Can we please move on? We're neighbors. You're a big country. Can we just move on and be civilized adults now?" And Ukraine's like, "Sure, just apologize." And they're like, okay, we apologize. It doesn't count, and just do that to them forever. And here's the thing: they'll be entitled to do it, right? I mean, this is this is why you don't. This is why you shouldn't invade other countries. Japan is never going to have a normal relationship with South Korea. South Korea is going to hold that against Japan, and it's entitled to. And Ukraine can and should. I mean, but there again, I mean, most of Eastern Europe's been invaded by Russia, so it's kind of surprising in a way that Russia's gotten as much of a berth as it's had. But it's definitely, I much respect to the Ukrainians sticking it to the Russians over this, but that might be the only thing they can end up doing in the end. Checking the comments, I don't see much happening there in terms of directed at me, although, yeah, great to see, of course, more people rocking in. Just what I find interesting of the space stuff, it is interesting that Ukraine has asked for, and indeed Elon Musk, he delivered Starlink terminals, basically satellite internet. Satellite internet exists, by the way. In fact, there was a great video on the channel Answers by Joe, which is just a good YouTube channel that I like. And he's done a big video talking about the history of satellite internet. But of course, it's about to get very, very big. And in places like, at least like Tokyo, it's not going to make that much of a difference because we have awesome fiber-based internet. But if you're ever in a situation like in Tonga, where, for example, in the end of the day, and this is another thing when you talk about with wars, it's kind of crazy to think in this day and age. In fact, I can tell you my first job in Japan, when I was involved in a consulting company and I had to do some research on how the internet works with the telecommunication companies and the sort of big routing hubs that they have, the switches that they have for directing internet traffic that go through these huge fiber optic cables that go thousands of kilometers connecting countries. And I had to brief a partner who was going to go and do a sales presentation to one of these companies that sells this equipment. And he was like, "No, I thought the internet, that doesn't go through cable. That's old-fashioned. It goes all through satellites, doesn't it?" And I was like, no, the satellites don't do that. No, it all goes through actual physical cables still. And this is the thing. It's kind of freaky to think, particularly when you think about a country that has submarines and a huge military, although apparently not as good a military as we all thought they had, but like with Russia. But there are a few cables that you could just cut, and you can completely cut off the internet to large countries, particularly island countries like Japan and Australia, whatever. If you find out where the cables are, you can cut those countries off. And at least, and of course, as we found out, even natural disasters, like in the case of Tonga, they had their internet cable cut by volcanic eruption. So while it's definitely still preferable to have cables for internet, for emergencies and for government and emergency and disaster communications, starting with Starlink. And I think there's going to be OneWeb and Kuiper and a few others coming out. And there's already some that already exist that just aren't very good, but that will be able to give basically broadband and be able to give connectivity in areas that either don't have fiber going to them right now, like most of Australia, the interior of countries like Australia, or remote islands and stuff like that, which does make sense for some parts of Japan. But again, for war zones and so on as well, it just means that it's going to become impossible to cut off. And just think as well, in Russia, I mean, I imagine that rich Russians, but imagine that the day will come when, just having a satellite dish you won't be able to, at the moment, Russia's cutting off Twitter and Facebook and BBC and access to foreign news and whatever. But this is the technology that when normalized, apart from the fact that there'll be tens of thousands of satellites flying 25 times faster than bullets above our heads, hopefully not crashing into each other. But it'll make it impossible to control regular internet, or at least to cut it off the way that it's happening. But right now we're still at risk of that. And apparently, Elon Musk, I think this is a much better donation than the cave diving tank. That didn't work out so well, but this is actually a good thing, and I'm excited about this and other similar services that are just going to mean for parts of the world that still aren't very well connected, it's going to improve those. And it just means in these sort of situations with war zones as well that people are going to be able to get information out and get help. And I do love the idea that, you're going to be able to, in the case of an earthquake or something else, in an emergency, it wouldn't be as good as regular internet, but you'd still be able to watch videos on YouTube from this, which you totally can't do at the moment with current satellite internet. So I think Starlink is super cool, and it's going to be transformative again for things that we're seeing in the world right now. Although, of course, Putin did recently practice shooting satellites down from ground-based ballistic missiles, and I guess that's something that he might be practicing some more, particularly if he feels like it's all going to go the wrong way. So we'll see. That video at the top of the screen I did lately. I think I showed you last week that I've been making 360 videos out running. I found it was particularly fun going out at night. Actually, I ran through Ikebukuro. The cherry blossoms are not out yet, but they will be out in the next week or so. And I'm going to run a bunch of courses that will take me through streets and parks full of cherry blossoms. I think that'll make for some really cool videos. Also, DJ Sunny Side Up, who's often here in the comments every week, actually shot me over a track, and I figured out how to beat sync, how to make imported music match from the video. I use a video editing soft called BeatLeap, and it makes it very easy. You just dump a whole lot of clips into it, and it will arrange it in time with the music, so it looks really cool. And I figured out how to do that with imported music. So he's going to make some tracks for me, actually, which I'm going to put up. To not spam everybody on this channel, about every Wednesday, I'm going to put up one video. I think the next video I'm going to use his music for. I'm going to put up another night video, but I love how these things look. The resolution isn't great. It's a 360 camera, so it's actually taking 5.6K, but it's in all directions. And so when you edit it, it is going to be a little bit grainy in whichever direction you're taking it from, but it shows how these cameras, I think, are actually now, Insta360 has done a great job. They've really figured out the technology, at least the software, really, really well. And it makes me excited for when there are 8K and higher resolution versions of this. That'll mean that there'll be a normal HD, clear image of whatever we're shooting, but it looks great right now. So I'm going to make some more of those. Those are a lot of fun. So you can see those in addition to these 1 hour long streams every week. The other big story this week, the big domestic story that had nothing to do with Russia this week, was that Greg Kelly, a board member of Nissan and advisor of Carlos Ghosn, who was arrested with Carlos Ghosn when he was drawn to come and attend a meeting in Japan on a private jet, and was arrested, of course, at Haneda Airport. He was given a suspended sentence. He was convicted on just one count out of, I believe, 8 counts that he was charged with. My understanding of what this was about is essentially they were accusing Ghosn of having hidden compensation, that he had his annual pay statement, but instead, it's a common thing in Japan that because there's a lot of public resentment, the idea, in America, people brag about how much they're, as a CEO how much they're getting paid. And companies feel like they have to they have to pay these crazy millions of dollars salaries to attract proper CEOs who seem to have bounced around different jobs in different companies. In Japan, where employment is for life and people come up from the rank and file, the notion that a CEO who it should get paid some radically different amount to what regular workers are entitled to. The maximum sort of socially acceptable amount of salary really for most CEOs is probably less than 500,000. It's probably most companies it'd be around 200, 300,000. That hasn't really changed very much. If you really want to get more than $1 million a year as a CEO, you've got to work in a privately held company that doesn't disclose, where you don't have to disclose how much you're paying the boss to shareholders. But in companies where it's publicly known, like Nissan, while in other big auto manufacturers, you'd expect the CEO of Ford is probably getting tens of millions of dollars salary. In Japan, they can't take that much. But of course, these companies are hugely profitable. So what they do for their elder statesmen, for their founding presidents and whatever, they get around. There's a loophole they'll get around. Instead of paying $10 million a year, they'll pay them $1 million a year or $500,000 a year. But when they retire, they'll give them a retirement package of like $60 million. And this is what they were planning to line up for Ghosn, was an idea that when he leaves Nissan, he would be paid a retirement package of something like, I believe, $30 million. And the thing about this is that it wasn't approved. It wasn't actually finalized. It was a plan that was discussed, and it was actually approved within the board as a business decision. But it wasn't actually formally adopted. But there was again, the story that Ghosn and others are putting is that there was just generally the true background of this, of course, is that Ghosn had plans to integrate Renault and Mitsubishi and Nissan into one company, all under his leadership. And the Japanese leaders of Nissan were panicking, were basically hunting for anything that they could do to sort of push back and get rid of Ghosn. And what they came up with was the idea that perhaps this planned retirement package was a way that it could be said that he was hiding compensation by deferring. He was basically putting compensation into the future and not declaring it, which you have to declare as part of taxes and public filings, and suggesting that was fraud. But, because Ghosn was bringing forward the plans to integrate the companies, they were forced to act probably sooner than they were ready. And so in the end, they did go to prosecutors saying that he had not declared, income that had been agreed. And prosecutors, for the first time ever, while this sort of hiding of not reporting deferred income thing had never been prosecuted before in Japan before, even though it happens a lot, apparently, with retiring, CEOs and so on. It's a common trick to sort of pay, theoretically underpaid CEOs. The prosecutors sort of listened to the Nissan people, including people who had cooperated in approving these payments, saying that, okay, I'm going to turn myself in and give you all the evidence that you can prosecute Ghosn, and as an accomplice, Kelly, who helped him to come up with this plan. But it was the first time this had ever been prosecuted, and just the fact that the prosecutors seemed to go along with Nissan at their word and not, they were prosecuting Kelly as an advisor of something that everybody, including Saikawa, the president who took over from Ghosn, that they themselves were actually guilty of the same thing. But again, they kind of declared themselves to be whistleblowers and were given immunity in exchange for giving evidence against Kelly and Ghosn himself. But they were actually more guilty. Kelly only signed off on the idea, on the plan for the compensation package for 1 out of 8 years, whereas the whistleblower it did it for like 7. The head of HR and the other people in this end actually did it for like 7 out of 8 years, and they said, okay, I'm gonna, I'll be expert counsel. And again, this was just really a way to get going that the prosecutors went along with, and it was on something that, the fact that they were obviously being very selective with the prosecution. And Kelly himself had said he was very confident that he would prove himself not guilty because the plan was never actually approved. It was just a plan. It was an idea, but it was signed off by the company lawyers. It was signed off by the whole board, and it was never actually. And it was a plan. It was never actually sort of finalized or finally approved or implemented. It was just an idea that had been floating around. So in the end, apparently out of 8 charges brought against Kelly, he was acquitted of 7. But he was found guilty of 1, which was basically for signing off and approving in 1 of the 8 years, apparently, and was given a suspended 6-month prison sentence, which for 3 years. So if he doesn't do anything else for 3 years, he won't go to jail, and he's allowed to go back to America. Now remember though, he waited, and he was in jail. He was in prison for 2 years, and was basically under house arrest for a further year, for 3 years, waiting for a trial. On basically some charges that, in his case in particular, as an advisor, doing what everybody else on the Nissan board who was supporting the prosecution was doing. And he was given, it almost feels like he was given a 6-month suspended sentence, because the judges just felt like they, given all the profile of the case and all the work that the prosecutors went in, if there had been nothing, there would have just been an uproar, and the prosecutors would have appealed. So it's almost like a token guilty, like, okay, it's a gold star. We realized you all tried very hard, kind of a thing. But Kelly, to his credit, is going to appeal. He's going to be allowed to appeal from America. He won't have to come to Japan from it. He won't have to spend more time in prison. Also interesting to see actually if the prosecutors themselves appeal. They can appeal an acquittal in Japan. Prosecutors can do that. But and they spend a lot of time on this. But again, I feel a lot of sympathy for Kelly. But in the case of Ghosn, Ghosn belongs in prison. If for nothing else, the fact that he hired mercenaries to, hide him, to smuggle him out of the country, and fly him to Lebanon, where he's now living in a Nissan paid-for house. Just for that alone, he deserves to be in prison, let alone all the other stuff that came out of embezzlement and misappropriation of funds in Renault in Europe. He's wanted in Europe as well, of course, as well as Japan. So I have the fact he ran away and basically left Kelly, in an even worse situation. No sympathy for Ghosn whatsoever, actually. He really threw his friend under the bus. Whatever the merits that Ghosn had, and Kelly absolutely, I hope he appeals, and I hope that he wins and shows what a waste of time this was. And if the prosecutors are really sincere, they'll go and prosecute all of the other former Japanese company presidents that have done this, and show that this wasn't just a selective prosecution, a political and xenophobic prosecution of a foreign CEO and a foreign advisor, the one foreign advisor. They didn't prosecute any of the Japanese who did the same thing. So, talk about Japan wanting to make itself a financial hub to attract foreign business and investment, and yet this sort of case just makes Japan look like a kind of a North Korea for execs, right? I mean, the fact that he was in prison, was in a jail for most of the time, waiting 3 years for a trial that he was basically almost entirely acquitted of. So really does show the Japanese justice system and the political system as corrupt and inefficient, and actually, which is a shame, because that's not how it is on the whole. But these prosecutors who are involved in this case, I think, have compromised the integrity of and the appearance of the Japanese justice system. And say, again, when people are leaving Hong Kong to go and set up as a financial hub somewhere else in Tokyo, the governor of Tokyo is talking about, we want to make Tokyo, we want to go and attract all of those investment bankers and all of that investment money that's leaving Hong Kong right now. And some are talking about, like, for example, when the New York Times shifted its Asia bureau to Seoul, Korea instead of Japan. And a lot of people said, well, that's crazy. Information and media and the state control over in Korea is kind of crazy. Why would you go over there and not here? And I was in that camp as well. And I think that generally speaking, Tokyo is objectively more liberal and free, for investing and for information and so on than most other places in Asia. But stuff like this happens. And again, it does just make Japan look like another kind of authoritarian state. So, it's done huge damage, I think, to Japan's image. And it is an injustice, but there again, in the end of the day, he gets to go home. Rahm Emanuel, it was interesting to see what the U.S. ambassador would say, and he said that he was very glad that he'll get to go home, and congratulations to him and his family. Obviously, the U.S. ambassador doesn't want to test things with Japan relations at the moment, given the state of the world. But I'm glad that he's appealing anyway, and this is just a crazy case. The fact that, he's just an advisor who signed off with a group of other Japanese execs on a retirement package, totally standard. And the fact that he's given a 6-month sentence for that, and no one else is, not just in Nissan, but in any other company, is just nuts. So anyway, that's that case. Back into the comments. Barry Bonds, good to see you. Hope I'm doing well. We need Japan to open the economy. It has taken a hit. Indeed, yes, indeed. And I hope that it will. Setsuna, good to see Setsuna here in the comments. Sainted Sir, hello. Hello right back at you. Good to see you. Mr. Quixotic, good to have you in here, Mr. Quixotic. And everybody else who's joining. If I've missed anybody, I'm going to go into, I think I've got a couple more topics here, not many to go. I'm going to be pretty much on time tonight. A great video that I watched, actually, it's from a channel, Economics Explained, which I think is an Australian channel, but they did a really great video. Going a bit into, I'm not an economics academic. I did politics in university and political economics, but this is proper sort of economics. But it considers what a lot of what you keep reading over and over, that apparently it starts out explaining that in terms of economic models of the world, there was sort of 4 models in the 1980s. There was capitalism, socialism, Argentina, and Japan. And Japan was always seen as this sort of anomaly. And Japan's sort of deflation economy that it's had since the 1990s was really not understood or by anyone else. But other countries now in Europe and America are starting to kind of see the same signs of things happening of what's happened with Japan, both the demographic changes with deflation and so on, and all of the sort of strategies that Japan's used not working, and it's just a really great video explaining both what's happened to the Japanese economy since the 1990s and the things that have been tried in Japan and haven't really worked for reviving the economy, but what the lessons from that are for other countries in Europe and basically OECD countries that are starting to see the same things happen. Just a really good explainer for understanding the Japanese economy and where it really fits in the world. And again, like Japan in many ways is kind of a sign for the future. So that was a good video. And I think that's just about it. I've got 2 more. Now, what was this one about? Oh, yeah, the Japanese government on accepting Ukrainian refugees. They were using the Japanese word nanmin, that they would accept nanmin from Ukraine. And someone pointed out, we don't really do the refugees thing. So they changed the terminology to hinan shiteru hito, to people who are evacuating from refugees. Again, kind of awful. I mean, the fact that the Japanese Prime Minister said that Japan will be accepting refugees from Ukraine, and I sarcastically pointed out, remembering that Japan only accepts about 20 refugees per year, that the fact he said plural means that they'll be accepting at least 2. And then someone pointed out correctly that Kishida said it in Japanese, so it could have been singular. It's ambiguous. It could be that Japan will accept refugee from Ukraine, and then they decided not even to say refugee anymore, just evacuee, i.e., you can park your car here and leave the hazard lights on, more or less. So even Japan's kind of trying, but it can't really change its form that much. I've given my opinions on this before, including recently I went on a genealogy thing. And seeing people walking across Ukraine into Poland and across Europe at the moment for days, and what those families are going through. I have a small part of my family background which did the same thing, which walked across Europe, and dealt with assholes along the way. I became my grandfather entered New Zealand as a registered refugee. And thank heavens it wasn't controversial back in those days. And again, the idea that you accept refugees and they integrate and become regular citizens. I mean, that's actually what countries like the United States and Britain and New Zealand and Australia are more or less just there used to be pretty much unregulated immigration. But I was actually from the only family registered in the naturalization records. You could actually see it, and they were actually registered as refugees coming into New Zealand in 1910. In that year, they were just about the only ones. And from Romania, from quite close actually, from the right on the Danube beside where Ukraine is. So kind of different, but. And doesn't inform me anything on the situation right now, but again, when I hear the story of 100 years ago, what happened with this part of my own family, and I look at what's happening in Ukraine today, it's like, geez, it hasn't changed. I mean, the same stuff, and the fact that it's happened multiple times, in between as well, is just crazy to me. So around all of this, the idea that the Japanese government is still we won't take refugees, I think people still are humans are naturally just so afraid, and they conflate immigration and refugee. status as well. And this idea that refugees are just people coming to take our jobs and money. No, refugees are people who are refugees. Yes, there are people who claim to be refugees who are not legitimate refugees. That happens, but but if they are legitimate refugees, that's a completely different category to anything else, right? And you could be a refugee from having flooding, your house get flooded, or a tornado rip your roof off, and it's just a matter of giving people a place to stay and looking after them the way that you would want to be looked after if you ever found yourself, heaven forbid, in the same situation. In countries except, you live in a society, you take care when people need that sort of help. The fact that Japan is even being ambiguous about the labeling of people who are, running for their lives at the moment is still just crazy to me, but that is Japan. Final story I've got tonight. It actually does tie to what I was saying earlier that, actually two stories there. One, of course, I was talking about how the dispute over the Northern Islands there shapes Tokyo's stance on the Ukraine crisis, which is Tokyo's kind of tiptoeing around. Japan's been tiptoeing around whether it can work out a peace treaty with Russia and some sort of deal around the islands. But again, the fact that Russia's too nationalist to ever give up the islands, no matter how much money it's for, kind of also paints that Tokyo's never going to get that close to Russia so long as Russia's like that, which means that, it can definitely, and the fact that it also can look differently at what's happening in Ukraine in the context of, Russia totally did the same thing in a much more limited way at the end of World War II. Russia's invasion of those islands, by the way, and the thought that it might turn Japan into a version of like Korea, like a North and South Japan, with Russian army occupying half of it, and given how anti-communist Japan was, and they realized that it was better really to have the Americans than the Russians occupying, it prompted the Japanese, some say more than the A-bombs, was the fact that Russia started invading in the north, that prompted Japan to surrender quickly to the Americans. That mistrust of Russia, that sort of seeing the potential but never quite being able to trust Russia definitely colors Japan's relations. However, that said, Sakhalin, which also used to be Karafuto, is the Japanese name for it, and the lower half of Sakhalin was part of Japan proper. It was integrated like Okinawa during World War II, and that was also, of course, taken back by the Russians. And if the Japanese had realized that Sakhalin is full of oil and natural gas, they might not have gone and invaded. I mean, they totally would have gone and invaded China anyway, of course. But given that they were doing it ostensibly because of the U.S. oil embargo and that they had to go and secure their own energy supplies, and yet it was underneath their feet all along in Sakhalin, and they lost Sakhalin, and now Russia's getting all the money from all the gas there. And you talk about how Japan, again, as one of its sources of reserves of energy, is that it is a customer of, particularly of natural gas from Sakhalin, but also oil. There's a lot of stuff happening up there. And again, you talk about what the dividend of making peace with Russia would be, that it'd be really easy to make a pipeline. It's a short ferry ride over to those areas. And it was interesting that for all of the Japan going along with some of the toughest sanctions on Russia at the moment, a government minister actually did say that, we shouldn't go too crazy, because if we pull out of our investments in Sakhalin, then China's going to sweep them all up and we're going to be stranded without energy and they're going to be able to blockade us. So we don't want to totally give away all of our cards on that. This is why, in my opinion, the switch to a hydrogen-based economy is such a good idea for Japan. Not just that it's eco-friendly, not just the fact that you can generate green hydrogen from literally seawater or river water and, a windmill, but you could, if you wanted to make it in higher volumes, you could put it, Japan has a power grid, so it's not able to distribute renewable electricity very well, but if you just have as much wind or as much renewable energy as the wind blowing or sun shining will allow, and you store it, rather than putting it into the grid, you generate hydrogen from it, which you can move around, basically the same as like you would with gas. And hydrogen is not a climate gas. It's you could generate it in a way that is climate friendly, and would give Japan energy independence. You could do it all domestically. You wouldn't have to get it from Iran anymore, like Japan's been getting it, or from Russia or anywhere else. Japan could be energy independent. And not be dependent, and not even have to think twice about morality. About taking moral stands conflicting with national energy security, like it has to do right now. This is the argument to me for green and even blue hydrogen, even converted hydrogen from petroleum sources. But it gives Japan the potential to generate its own, and again, not being beholden to Russia is a very good reason to accelerate that. The Japanese government is moving in that direction, but the fact that people still don't feel safe quite saying no to all. And it's the same problem with Europe, of course, that they get their gas from Russia as well. Japan is a smaller scale version of that. But yeah, it's fascinating that island is so rich in the end of the day. And it would be so beneficial to Russia if they were more connected to Japan. They could develop the whole Far East a lot more, but it's a real backwater for Russia as it is. And I guess that's the way it's always going to be, because they, in the end of the day, they just go crazy and they care more about nationalism than they really see sense a lot of times. And that seems to be the way a lot of authoritarians in the world think, and it's what's holding back China as well. You know, and that unfortunately is it. Pretty much, you can't really expect very much. What's happening in Ukraine right now is just nuts. And you know, I feel bad for Russians as well, but at the same time, you know, and remembering that the Russian soldiers there are conscripts, and you know, you don't want to wish anyone, you know, ill, but at the same time, they're the, you know, as much as the economic sanctions are going to cause chaos and suffering in Russia, in the end of the day, you know, not being able to take money out of an ATM is tough. Hyperinflation is tough, and it's going to ruin a lot of lives, but not as much as, you know, having your building shelled. You know, the stuff that people in Ukraine are going through is much worse than anything sanctions are going to bring to Russia. And if they feel pain from it, you know, will sanctions work? It worked in South Africa. It took a long time. It's changed a lot of countries just through, you know, reminding people that even when you're cut off from the world from information, you can still see when, you know, the whole world's cut you off for what you're doing, and maybe your government isn't right about everything. So I think good on all the countries, including Japan, that are showing solidarity on this. I do wish that there was more that we could do. I wish that we could help Ukraine enforce its own declared no-fly zone over itself, which is being used by Russia to just bomb the hell out of it at the moment. I realize that you don't want to get into a shooting war directly with Russia and NATO powers at the moment, but at the same time, you know, I hope that they hold on, and I hope that the Russians go. And again, I'm glad that Japan is doing, it can't do much, but I'm glad it's doing what it's doing to show proper solidarity with all of that. So yeah, I guess there's going to be more of that in the next week. I do hope that this thing doesn't drag out like the Chechnya war and those wars did, which is just horrible for everybody. Although that's the way it looks right now. It doesn't look like Ukraine's going to cut its losses and just give in. But that will mean, unfortunately, another sort of Grozny situation where Russia's not able to move forward quickly either. And in the end of the day, if they can't take it over quickly and cleanly, they're just going to do it through, you know, endless shelling, which is pretty awful. But again, Japan should be there for refugees, not just evacuees. And stuff like this, if it's an opportunity for Japan to not only cut more ties with Russia, but also to actually develop energy independence and be more environmentally friendly, it's a good opportunity. So that's where I'm at with that. Those are the topics for tonight. It is, I am 10 minutes over, so there we go, I did that. Quinn Ranked, Putin is a war criminal. Well, yeah. I mean, going and just bombing a whole bunch of civilians for no reason. You know, there are other, you can cynically point out that there are other examples of Western countries doing it, but not like this, not with like, well, yeah, I mean, Iraq, I think is also actually in a similar category. But in the end of the day, I mean, Ukraine has a zero history of aggression against other nations in its neighborhood. The pretext of, you know, the secessionists and so on is just nuts to me. So yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. Ninja Monkey, good to see you in here. And indeed, as I mentioned earlier in the show, check out Ninja Monkey for updates if you want to be a tourist to Japan, and what the likely timeline for that is. Who knows? Could be by the end of this year. So that's a great channel to follow. Indeed, Ukraine will likely be partitioned, which seems inevitable. And you know what? To me, it's like with Georgia and Moldova as well, cutting out those Russian bits. Russia deliberately wants those little bits in there undermining those countries. Frankly, to me, cutting them out is like cutting out a cancer. If they get rid of, if they cut loose Donbass and in Crimea, then the rest of them can join NATO and EU. They can't join the EU if part of their territory is occupied. So it would be worth it actually to partition, and then the partition part to go join NATO. Obviously, that's what Russia's trying to avoid here, but to me, that would be the best outcome. John Carlo Illinois, good to see you. Never heard Putin spoke English. I don't think he spoke English either. Well, maybe he can a little bit, but I've never heard it. I don't know if I said anything like that. Couldn't rank it. Don't forget the Russians who are fleeing to Finland to avoid Putin's punishment for independently speaking their minds. And that's another interesting area, by the way. Part of my ethnic conflict course, actually Finland is half of its original size. Karelia, the other half of that peninsula, it was all originally Finland. That was all taken over by Russia. So technically Finland even today is like half occupied by Russia, like for 100 years now. So I think even the Finns pretty much accept that. But there are ethnic Finns in Russia, in a territory called Karelia on the other side. But the fact that they're now suddenly realizing that, yeah, maybe NATO is a good idea. Maybe, Russia's going to come for the other half. Totally. PB, have we already swept past peak humanity? I hope not, but it does feel like that sometimes. And very good to see you, John Carlo Lanoy. Eric Bailey, good to see you. Nothing wrong with an innocent man escaping prison. Well, yeah, there is. Punishment before conviction is always injustice. Well, no, I think paying mercenaries to smuggle you out of... I mean, look, he should have gone through the justice, through the legal process, and then there was much more actually to what Ghosn was doing than the charges just on Kelly. And no, I think in Mexico you're allowed to legally try to escape from prison, but most legal systems don't allow people to to skip the country, especially billionaires. I mean, I've got no sympathy at all paying mercenaries to help you escape from what are still legal proceedings, legitimate legal proceedings. No, he belongs in jail for that. Shows he thinks he's above the law. He's not Steven Seagal. He's not Nico. He's not Carlos Ghosn above the law. No. He belongs in jail just for that. Barry Bonds. I hope I'm doing well. Need your power, and I saw that comment earlier. So I think I'm caught up on comments. Great to see everybody. Anyway, thanks for joining me this week. Thanks everybody. Remember, if you like the show, thanks for keeping me company every week. If you like, please remember to like the video. I'll be back here next week because I've got nothing else to do, of course. Brianna W, thank you for the like. Everybody, do remember to hit the like button if you like the like. Check out on Anchor FM. There is the audio version of this, which I'll be putting up just after the end of the show, for people who want to watch the start of this and maybe listen to it in the car. Quentin Rankid, the Soviet Union and the West tried men for waging aggressive war. I hope the new regime in Russia will cooperate with the West and try people who, well, indeed, if there's a regime like overthrow in Russia, that's a possibility, certainly. And Aaron says that I watched this yesterday about the war budgets of countries and the effect. I wonder if Japan would remilitarize. Japan, again, it kind of already is got the fifth biggest spending on military in the world as it is. Abe's talked about the idea that, maybe NATO nations should share around nukes with one another so that they can defend themselves, and Japan should get in on that too. His brother immediately called him an idiot. I talked about that last week. People will always talk about that. I don't know if Japan's going to fully normalize with the military thing. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see how it reverberates out here, particularly with China and whatnot. So maybe a topic for next week. But I am going to finish the show there. Eric Bailey, certainly. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, and you can say good on him for escaping. But as a lawyer, I'd have to say, nah, you can't do that. Just that thing that he did is it by itself, reason to put him in jail. That's my opinion, but you're certainly entitled to yours. And if you think that Ghosn was a victim of injustice and he was entitled to make a run for it, then that's a perfectly legitimate point of view for you to have. I disagree, but that's okay. We're all friends here. Have a good week, everybody. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter. Message me if you ever want to. Well, if you ever want to reach out, feel free to message me on Twitter. Remember, you can keep up with all these news and topics that I go through, as well as my random thoughts and ramblings during the week there. Check out for another running video as we come near to the cherry blossom season. I'll put that out on Wednesday. And I'll see you all back here next Wednesday. Good to see you. Have a good week, everybody. Boom. Peace. Ending stream. Ending.